As you've heard on Bridge City News, Johnson & Johnson has pulled its COVID-19 vaccine from the United States and Australia. To discuss this in a little more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Brian, has Canada also decided to yank the vaccine? I understand millions of doses were expected to begin arriving in May.
At this point, no. And in fact, the government says they are aware of the concerns. They do continue to monitor it. Health Canada put out a statement on Tuesday saying that they had received more information on the Johnson & Johnson, or it's sometimes referred to by Janssen. That's the company that makes it, owned by Johnson & Johnson. So just so everyone knows, there are multiple names for it. This was a vaccine that an awful lot of people were excited for because it had one shot. Unlike all the others, one shot. More traditional style of vaccine. You didn't need a two-dose. You didn't need really deep freeze. This could have been a game changer. It's being pulled for the same reason that some people have questions about AstraZeneca, and that being blood clots. Now, we have to keep in mind that we're talking about millions of doses of this vaccine have been given out, and there have been about 7 incidents of blood clots, including one person who died. That is a 1 in a million chance of this happening. So very low. And like AstraZeneca and the concern over blood clots, this is something that there are prescription drugs that we take all the time that have a much higher probability of giving you blood clots, especially women, than this vaccine. But people are being so cautious. The United States, though, and I heard Dr. Sanjay Gupta on CNN talking about this the other day, he was asked, well, isn't this vaccine safe compared to all these other things? And he said, yes, it is. But because we have so much Pfizer and so much Moderna, we don't need this one. Sadly, in Canada, that's not the position that we're in.
The first case of a rare blood clot from the AstraZeneca vaccine has been discovered in Canada, involving a woman from Quebec who's recovering at home. Brian, first we heard of the blood clots in Europe, and now they've made their way to our country. This may be something that's making Canadians a little nervous or maybe hesitant of getting their COVID-19 vaccine shots.
Yeah, well, when you've got both Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca having the same problem, yes. And when you've got very little context, I mean, I just gave you the context about how, widely used prescriptions, like the birth control pill, far more likely to cause blood clots than either of Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca. That context isn't put out there. And so people hear blood clots and they think, oh, it's not safe. You know what's more likely to give you blood clots than either of these vaccines? COVID. One of the outcomes of COVID-19 is blood clots. The vaccines, both AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, are far safer than catching the virus, but it will make people hesitant. I have heard from countless people already that they will not take it. We've seen governments, the federal government, for a while, we had both Health Canada and NACI, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, arguing over which age group AstraZeneca was safe for. All of these things, I think, will develop and feed into vaccine hesitancy, which was already an issue to begin with when it comes to COVID vaccines.
Now, apparently, there's still more delays when it comes to actually receiving some of these COVID-19 vaccines, specifically from Moderna. What's the latest?
So Moderna, and this is not a federal government issue, this is the company issue, but the feds do have to wear this to a degree because it's their responsibility to get it, it's the province's responsibility to administer it, and Moderna's been having trouble meeting their deliveries for the last little while. You'll remember at the end of March, they were supposed to deliver their last big tranche of vaccines, and they ended up putting it off until I think April 1st or 2nd for doses that had been expected more than a week before that. Well, now doses that were supposed to show up on April 5th have just arrived in Canada and are now being distributed to the provinces. The doses that are supposed to show up on April 19th have now been put off to April 29th. Now, when asked about this, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did himself no favors because he said, well, sometimes deliveries are delayed by a day or two. No, we're talking a week to 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks. That's a significant delay. Manitoba has had to reschedule people. Ontario had opened up some clinics. I think we discussed it last time at Canada's Wonderland, the big amusement park. They had to shut those down because those were specifically for Moderna. Nova Scotia's had to change its plans. Each of the provinces is having to adjust because they're significant shipments, and it's a good vaccine, but it is showing up late, and that just delays everyone's plans. And so, whether it's Alberta or British Columbia or Saskatchewan, everyone's dealing with this at the moment.
Now, the variants have been making their presence felt in Canada, Brian. Our country has now surpassed the United States in terms of COVID cases per capita.
Yeah, this is something that has not happened yet, and it happened, depending on how you measure, Monday or Tuesday of this week. And on a per capita basis, we now have more COVID-19 cases than the United States. Yeah, none of this is good news. The Trudeau government was always able to say, oh, look south of the border, look how bad things are down in the United States. Well, even in places where they've opened back up, COVID cases on a per capita basis are like places like Texas. Um, they are lower than we are here. Other jurisdictions in the United States are still in lockdown or facing certain types of restrictions, and in some areas they're putting them back in. But on a per capita basis, lower COVID-19 case counts than we have. This is a bad sign, and you're right, it is being fueled by variants. Here in Ontario, it tends to be the UK variant. In British Columbia, it's the Brazilian variant. And I forget the one, I think it's the Brazilian variant that you're mainly dealing with in Alberta as well. So it depends on where you are. And the only place that seems to be getting off scot-free is Atlantic Canada. Still no international flights into that area, and still tight travel restrictions if you go into the area.
Brian, CNN has apparently ripped Prime Minister Justin Trudeau a new one on our vaccine rollout, and Trudeau shot back with, we need to focus more on the facts. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this was a bit bizarre. The Americans don't normally pay an awful lot of attention to what goes on north of the border, but CNN does have a reporter based here called Paula Newton. Used to be a Canadian broadcast journalist. She's worked for the CNN and different American outlets for some time now. She did a report on our slow vaccine rollout. The Wall Street Journal had a piece in the weekend on this very same issue. And Jake Tapper, on his show The Lead on CNN, took the Canadian government, specifically Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, to task. When asked about it by Conservative leader Erin O'Toole during question period, Justin Trudeau's answer was, about sticking to the facts. Jake Tapper heard about this and tweeted back saying, what fact was wrong in this report? Canada's a great country, he said, but it's got bad leadership on the vaccine front. I can't say he's wrong, but it wouldn't be wise, considering that, probably more Canadians will watch CNN than they'll watch CBC's The National. It wouldn't be wise for Justin Trudeau to start picking a fight with this guy.
Brian, there have been calls to put in more restrictions from variant hotspots, including Brazil and India. But this week, our Prime Minister said, no chance.
Yeah, this is frustrating because, they will resist common sense solutions, such as putting quarantine orders in place for incoming travelers. They resisted that. They resisted increased screening early on. They resisted testing when that became an issue towards the end of 2020. They resisted stopping flights from hotspots until the UK variant was already in Canada. They didn't want to do that. Now Brazil and India are both sources of flights to Canada. They're both hotspots. They both have variants. We're worried about the variant in India. It's called a double mutant variant. It is the reason that country has seen a dramatic spike in COVID-19 cases. So we're concerned about that. But when asked about further travel restrictions, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just said, no, we don't need to do it. And we've got the most robust. I'm sorry, we simply don't. There are ways that we can improve it that don't necessarily include this $2,000 COVID hotel stay for 3 days, which is probably unconstitutional. There are common sense solutions, but he seems to resist them until it's too late. Of course, during that same news conference on Tuesday, he also said that when asked, would you have done anything differently? Did you make any mistakes? He said no.
It's interesting. I've been chatting with John Carpe, the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, and he talked to me about those quarantine hotels, and I believe they have 11 clients now that are suing, that had to pay out, like you said, $2,000. They came back healthy, safe, but yeah, he's got 11 clients and growing when it comes to Canadians who are tucked away in these quarantine hotels, these federal facilities. Brian, a video which went viral recently shows Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland calling COVID an opportunity while discussing a national childcare program at the Liberal convention. And that did not sit well with many people.
No, it seems rather cold and calculating, but in some ways it's par for the course for this government, which has long viewed the pandemic as an opportunity for a reset, a great reset, to build back better. Use whatever buzz term you want, Hal. Chrystia Freeland was talking about building a national childcare program and said COVID has presented a window of political opportunity. Say that to the families of the 23,000 people who have died from COVID-19.
Yeah, wow.
Say that to the more than 700,000 Canadians who are still unemployed due to this pandemic, or the more than 2 million who saw their wages or hours cut dramatically at some point during this pandemic. Tell that to the business owners, the tens of thousands of businesses that are hurting or will never come back. This is not a political opportunity. This is a pandemic, and you should be focused on it, Minister Freeland. But instead, they're focused on building back better, which to them just means we've got cover to put in things that we want to do that may not sit well with the public. So they want to bring in all kinds of national social programs. So in this case, they were talking about national daycare. Government-run daycare is consistently the least preferred option when parents of children under the age of 6 are polled. When they're asked, their most common, or the most popular answer is they'd like to find a way to stay at home. If not, they'd like a family member to look after their child. Following that, a neighborhood daycare center like the lady down the street. Government-run centers are the least popular option, except among a certain politically motivated group. And that's what they were talking about here. So shame on the Trudeau government, but this has been something that they have come back to time and again.
Now, still with the Liberals, they've long claimed to be a feminist government. So, Brian, let me ask you something. Why then did they shut down a committee investigation into sexual misconduct in the armed forces?
Because they could, and because it was embarrassing for them. They did have an assist from the Bloc Québécois. This was the National Defense Committee at the House of Commons. The Status of Women Committee is also reviewing the same issue of misconduct in the military and whether the government knew about it at the time. They've continued to give vague and strange answers on this. And so on Monday, they had a committee meeting, and I was watching the beginning of it and then just listening in as I was, working. The Liberals filibustered for about 90 minutes while their guests or their witnesses sat there. And then they tried to rush the witnesses through, and then at the end put up a motion calling for the study to be shut down. The Bloc voted with it and just ended this. So rather than continue to try and get to the bottom of what the government knew and when they knew it, they shut it down. As they did with SNC-Lavalin, as they did with WE, this is not a government that likes to be investigated, that likes the truth to come out.
Under the microscope. But that's what happens when you become a politician and you're in government here. Brian, we only have about a minute left here. Despite all of the troubles facing the Trudeau Liberals, several polls say that they would potentially win an election if one was held today. Do you think we may see a spring election?
I have been on Team Spring Election for quite some time, and I thought that they were going to bring in a budget, then say we need to build back better, and that we need a mandate to do it. With the rising COVID cases, I don't see it happening. But if these polls continue to show a big lead for them, it's going to be very, very tempting for the Liberals to do it. I know there's still back and forth in PMO and at party headquarters. We'll see who wins in a couple of weeks. The budget's next week, and we'll get a sense after that which direction they may be heading. But rising COVID numbers probably making them pause.
What do you mean, a big lead so we would see a majority government, not another minority?
Well, if they think that they could get a majority government because the poll's showing them having a big lead, then that might tempt them to say, you know what, forget the rising COVID numbers, let's go to the polls, let's get that majority. But I'm not sure that right now, while much of the country is under tight restrictions, that they want an election going on.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.